Hey guys, tonight we step into the kind of storm that swallows whole wagons, whole futures, and the only thing standing between life and death is the sound of hooves breaking snow. She clutched the cradle, not a real one, not wood or iron, just three swaddled lives pressed against her chest, wrapped in the last quilt Daniel had touched. His journal was tucked beneath her coat, close to her skin. She hadn't opened it in days. Couldn't. The wind shrieked through the broken wheel spokes. The wagon leaned like a dying elk, snowdrift halfway up the sides. You press your cheek to Benjamin's head. He doesn't stir. Abigail's breath is faint against your collarbone. Charlotte, the middle child, the loud one, is silent. You whisper through cracked lips, "Not yet. Don't leave me." Not like he did. Outside, the world's gone white, not soft white, not angelic, no. This white is sharp, cruel, a white that blinds, a white that takes. Mr. Patterson left hours ago, said he'd walk east toward the river bend, find a homestead, find anyone. But the river bend is a rumor, and time has stopped keeping track of hours. Your fingers have lost the ability to curl. Your feet can't tell if they're still there. But your children are warm as your body can keep them. The weight of them against your ribs is all that matters. You'd give them your last breath if you had to. You might have already. Then you hear it. Not wind, not tree, hoofbeats, 1, 2, 3, heavy, unhurried, coming straight for you. You raise your head. Your neck screams. But you see it. A shadow in the snow. A rider. He doesn't call out. He doesn't wave. He just swings down from his horse and steps forward like the storm isn't tearing at him, like he's done this 1,000 times. He opens the wagon door without knocking, and for a second you think, this is it. I'm about to die. Then his voice comes through the gale, low, measured. Anybody hurt in here? You nod. Or maybe you speak, you're not sure. You just remember the shift, the moment you weren't alone anymore. The man pulls off his hat. Snow falls from the brim like ash. His coat is sheepskin, heavy and worn. His eyes blue sharp, alive. He doesn't smile, but his voice softens when he sees the bundle in your arms. Triplets? He says, like the word has weight. They're cold, you whisper. So cold. He moves fast then, shrugs off the coat and lays it over all four of you. The weight of it, the warmth of it, it's more than fabric, it's hope. I've got a ranch 4 miles east, he says. Can your legs carry you? No. The word cracks like ice. He studies your face for just 1 second, then he moves, fast, efficient. You feel yourself being lifted, the baby still against you, his arms strong and certain. This'll hurt, he warns, but it'll keep them alive. You don't answer, you don't have to. His horse, black, tall, and watching, stands steady as he swings you both into the saddle. The triplets are cocooned between you and his chest. He pulls the blanket tighter. Then, his voice close now, right beside your ear. Talk to me. Stay awake. Tell me their names. You can barely form the words, but you do. Benjamin, Charlotte, Abigail. Good, Bisa, he says. We'll make sure they remember this ride. The wind fights back, but the horse pushes through it. You feel each hoofbeat in your spine, every step a defiance of death. The man, he doesn't ask questions. He doesn't offer the false comfort. But every time you slump, every time your head dips, he says something sharp. Eyes open. Breathe deep. Tell me what April looked like in Pennsylvania. And you tell him. You talk about the porch, the cradle Daniel never finished. The flowers you planted, the ones that never came up. You talk because if you stop, you'll fall asleep, and if you fall asleep, you might never wake. He seems to understand that, because he never lets the silence last long. The horse plows on. The storm doesn't ease. But eventually, you see it. Light, golden, flickering, real. A porch, a house, smoke from a chimney. You can't cry. Your tears froze hours ago. He swings down, then lifts you again. You try to stand, can't. He carries you to the door like you weigh nothing. Knocks once. A woman answers, older, strong face, smells like bread and smoke. She takes one look and says, "Get in, now." The man says one word, "Blankets." You hear her shout instructions, feel arms taking the babies. You clutch at them, panicked. "They'll be warm," she says gently. "Let me help you help them." The man sets you by the fire, unwraps one baby, then another. Abigail lets out a thin cry. The sound is the most beautiful thing you've ever heard. Then the man crouches, looks you in the eye. "Name's Mason Blackwell," he says. "You're safe now, I promise." And for the first time in months, you believe a man who says those words. You don't sleep that first night, not truly. The fire crackles and the babies breathe, and the sheepskin coat still holds the scent of his horse. You're wrapped in too many blankets to move, but your thoughts don't stop. They pace the edge of your exhaustion, always circling one question. Who is this man, and what does he want? Mason Blackwell doesn't talk much, but he watches. You caught his eyes drifting toward your babies, toward the way your hands shook when you tried to swaddle Charlotte again after Mrs. Hathaway, his housekeeper, helped feed her warm goat's milk. He said nothing then, just slipped an extra log on the fire and kept his distance. You notice how quiet he walks, how his voice carries even when it stays low. The way the other men on the ranch move when he passes, a nod here, a quick sir there. This is a man who owns things, not just land. He owns silence, command, warnings unspoken. And still, he laid his coat over 4 strangers in the middle of a storm without a second thought. Morning comes like a mercy. Light breaks through the frost-laced windows, throwing gold across the wooden floor. You stir, startled by the strange gentleness of warmth, without worry. For a second, you don't remember where you are. Then, Abigail's hand curls around your finger. She's warm, alive, eyes blinking open like the snow never touched her. Mrs. Hathaway enters with broth and a soft smile. The little ones slept well. They're stronger than I expected after all that. You manage a thank you, voice hoarse from wind and grief and disbelief. The woman pours hot broth into a small cup, wraps your fingers around it. "You've been on the edge too long, Mama," she says. "Let someone else carry the weight for a bit. Doesn't make you weaker, makes you wise." You sip. It burns, your throat, your pride. But she's right. You're too tired to argue. Later, Mason returns. His coat is dusted with snow, his boots heavy with silence. He sets down a tray, eggs, bread, thick butter, and nods toward your babies. They're looking better. Then, after a pause, "You too." You don't know how to respond, so you don't. Instead, you say the only thing you can. "Thank you for not leaving us." Mason studies you. His expression doesn't soften, but it does shift. You realize it's not stoicism, it's grief worn down to the grain, a man with no excess left, no flourishes, just function. "I've seen too many people die in snowstorms," he says. "Didn't plan to see 4 more. You watch him from the hearth. He doesn't sit. Just leans against the mantel, arms crossed, eyes on the fire. "Do you live here alone?" you ask. "Me and the hands," he answers. "Mrs. Hathaway's been with me since, for a while." You understand. There's a name unspoken in that space. A story he's not offering. You nod. There's quiet again, but not the kind that makes you nervous. The kind that rests between people, not yet strangers, but not yet anything else either. Then he says it, the line that shifts the ground under your feet. My wife died 4 years ago. You turn to face him fully. I'm sorry. He nods like he's heard it 100 times, maybe 1,000, but when he speaks again his voice is lower. She was pregnant when the fever came. We lost them both. You draw in a breath, the cradle in the corner, empty but clean, unfinished in its design, makes sudden sense. You hadn't noticed it before, now you can't stop looking at it. I lost Daniel 3 months ago, you whisper. Pneumonia. Took him in 5 days. He never met them, never held them. Mason doesn't look away. And neither do you. That's when you understand the most important truth of the day. This man isn't trying to save you. He's just making sure you don't vanish, because he knows what it feels like when someone does. Because someone did. Later that afternoon, when you insist on standing, he doesn't stop you. Just walks beside you as you test your feet, one slow step at a time, down the hallway of a house that already smells familiar, smoke, saddle soap, and pine boards warmed by fire. You ask to see the cradle. He nods once. He takes you through a narrow door into a small room filled with tools. It smells like cedar and dust and patience. It's not much, he says. You reach out, running your fingertips over the smooth grain. It's beautiful. 3 carved birds on the headboard. No names, no finish, just waiting. I started it 5 winters ago, he says. Didn't know why I kept going after she passed. Now you do. So does he. It fits them, you say. It fits us. He says nothing, but something unspoken passes between you heavier than words. That night, you wrap all 3 babies in one quilt and tuck them into that cradle. For the first time in weeks, you're not sleeping beside them. You can't. Not when you're this tired. You whisper a blessing over their heads anyway. Then you sleep. And for the first time since Daniel's funeral, it feels like more than just surrender. It feels like rest. You don't remember falling asleep, but you remember waking up. There's sunlight, real sunlight. The kind that drips golden down the walls and makes you forget, just for a moment, that anything ever went wrong. Abigail stirs first. Her eyes flutter open, wide and dark, the kind of eyes that hold entire futures. She doesn't cry. She just looks, like she's trying to understand how warmth could return after all that cold. You lift her from the cradle. Her small body is no longer frighteningly still. Her fingers wrap around yours with just enough strength to undo your composure. You cry for the first time, not quiet tears, not dignified ones, the kind that crumple you to your knees beside a carved cradle made by a grieving man in a room that smells like spring. Mrs. Hathaway finds you like that. Doesn't say a word, just kneels beside you and lays a hand on your shoulder, strong and steady. They're alive, you whisper. I didn't think they'd be, but they are, she says, voice thick. And so are you. That counts for more than you think. You don't know how to repay her kindness, or Mason's, or the fire that kept you breathing, but repayment isn't asked for. You spend the morning beside the hearth, watching Benjamin kick his legs like he's fighting something invisible. Charlotte is quieter, always has been. But when Mason passes through the room, she turns her head to track him. You notice, so does he. He brings coffee, strong, bitter, frontier brewed. You say, thank you again. It's the 3rd time in 2 days, and it still feels too small. Any word on Mr. Patterson? You ask. He nods toward the window. Doc Tucker's with him now. Lost a couple fingers. Might keep his life. The guilt hits fast and hard. If you hadn't pressed forward, if you hadn't ignored the warning clouds, wasn't your fault, Mason says before you can finish the thought. He chose to go. But for us? That's the kind of man he is. Don't rob him of that. You say nothing, but you tuck the truth away. At midday, Mason steps in again, coat dusted with snow, and says, You up for some air? You blink. Outside? Porch, he clarifies, 5 minutes. Cabin fever's a real thing. You hesitate. Look toward the babies, sleeping in a nest of blankets, pink, creeping back into their cheeks. I'll keep watch, Mrs. Hathaway offers. You nod and follow him through the front door, wrapped in a shawl too thick for Pennsylvania, but not for Montana. The snow is blinding, piled waist-deep against the rails. But the sun, it's doing battle. And winning. Mason leans on the post, arms crossed. You stand beside him, both of you staring out at the frozen world like it owes you an explanation. This storm, you say, nearly ended us. He nods once. Also brought you here. The wind cuts through the silence. You pull the shawl tighter. You think that makes it worth it? You ask. His gaze doesn't waver. I think storms don't ask permission. They just come. What we do after, that's the part that matters. He's not a man of many words, but when he speaks, they land, hard. You turn to him, study the profile, worn by wind and time. You lost a lot, you say. So did you. A beat. And yet, we're here. His mouth twitches. Not quite a smile, but close. You look down at the snow, at the prints left behind by boots and hooves and fate. And you ask the question that's been scratching at the back of your throat since he rode into your life. Why did you come out that night? He doesn't answer right away. Then, quietly, didn't plan to. Thunder got uneasy. Kept pacing the gate, so I saddled up to see what he sensed. You blink. So, your horse saved us? Mason shrugs. Wouldn't be the first time. You laugh. A real one. Surprising in its sound, warm against the cold. He turns, eyes sharper now. Haven't heard you laugh yet, he says. Haven't had much to laugh about. Maybe that'll change. The words aren't a promise, but they feel like one. You watch a bird land on the rail, small, brown, ridiculous in the snow. I was supposed to reach Helena by now, you say. He doesn't reply, just watches you. My cousin's expecting us. It was her idea to come west. Said she'd help with the children. You trust her? You hesitate. I wanted to. That's answer enough. He looks back toward the trees, voice soft. You don't owe anyone your suffering, Elela Nena. He uses your name for the first time, full, proper, like it matters. You tuck that moment into the quiet parts of your chest. Then, behind you, a cry, Abigail. Awake, wanting. You move instinctively back toward the door, but Mason touches your arm. Let me. You blink. You? She quiets faster if I'm holding her. You should feel something about that. Surprise, protectiveness, disbelief. But what you feel is trust. So you let him go. You watch him disappear into the warm glow of the house, and you stay on the porch another minute longer, breathing, feeling, realizing. You haven't felt safe in months, but something in you believes maybe you are now. The next morning the house smells like bread, not store bread, not the kind wrapped in paper from a city bakery. This bread is thick with survival, flour sifted beside a wood stove. yeast that rose during blizzard winds. You wake to that smell, and it roots something deep inside you, something older than grief, more primal than hunger. You rise slowly, muscles still sore from carrying your children through storm and fear. You expect to feel brittle, but instead, you feel strange, like you're living inside borrowed warmth. Like this house isn't entirely someone else's. When you open the door to the main room, Mason's already there. He's cradling Benjamin, not awkwardly, not like a man doing a favor. His hand cups the child's head with quiet confidence, and his body moves with the natural sway of someone who knows rhythm matters. Charlotte is on a blanket near the hearth, watching him, and Abigail, your littlest, is sleeping on his shoulder. You freeze. Something about the sight feels holy and dangerous. "Morning," he says without turning. "You've got your hands full," you manage. He shrugs. They're light. You step closer, carefully. Like if you move too fast, the spell will break. You're good with them. Had a little practice. You wait for him to elaborate. He doesn't. Instead, he shifts Abigail gently to your arms. She sighs, but doesn't wake. "Your cradle's a miracle," you whisper. "They slept better than I've ever seen." Mason nods, eyes on the flames. "Funny thing about that cradle." You wait? "I started carving it before last winter. Didn't know why. Just needed to. Figured it was for someone I hadn't met yet." You look at him, really look. And he meets your gaze with something too open to be called guarded. You don't know what to say, so you sit down near the fire, Abigail warm in your arms, and let the quiet fill the room like smoke curling upward. Mrs. Hathaway bustles in moments later, holding a letter in one hand and a kettle in the other. "This just arrived. Ryder from Helena brought it." You take the envelope, recognize the handwriting. "Harriet, your cousin." You don't open it right away. "Everything all right?" Mason asks. "Probably." You aren't sure. The seal cracks. You read silently. Harriet's tone is warm, insistent. She's eager, curious about the babies, apologetic that she wasn't able to meet you herself. She's arranged everything. A nurse, a room, a town doctor she wants you to meet, a man recently widowed, with a house and a name. She underlines that word, stability. Your stomach turns. "She means well," you say aloud. "But it's too soon." Mason says nothing, but you see how his shoulders tighten. "She thinks I'm still someone I'm not anymore," you add, folding the letter. "A woman who needs fixing." You don't know if you're talking to yourself or to him. Mrs. Hathaway serves coffee without a word, but her eyes say plenty. Later that day, you ask Mason if you can walk the property. "Won't get far," he warns. "Still, knee-deep snow. I need air, real air, not just porch air." He gives you a long look, then nods. "Bundle up. I'll come with." You don't argue. He leads you down a cleared path toward the barn. The world is white and glittering, but the sun makes it beautiful instead of threatening. "This is where I start," he says as you pass the corral. "Every morning. Feed, water, check for signs of wolves." Wolves? Always watching, sometimes waiting. You glance toward the tree line. Mason follows your gaze. "Not today," he says. The barn is warm, smells of hay, leather, and animal breath. A cow lows in the far stall. Somewhere, a horse stamps its foot. "This place feels alive, you say. It is. You touch the beam near the door. The wood is scarred, marked by work, not by time. I was afraid this land would feel foreign, like I didn't belong to it." Mason watches you. then says, "You're the kind of woman who makes the land adjust to you." You blink. That's supposed to be a compliment. "Wouldn't risk saying anything else," he says, but there's a smile tugging at the edge of his mouth. You smile back, and it doesn't feel forced. That night, you find a note on your door, not romantic, not lengthy, just Mason's handwriting, firm and slanted. "If you want to see the real reason I stayed on this land, meet me at the back porch at sunrise. Dress warm." You tuck it inside Daniel's journal, right beside the last entry he ever wrote. You stare at the fire that night longer than usual. The babies sleep, the house breathes, and when you finally fall into sleep, it's dreamless, just quiet, just full. You're up before the light. There's no cry, no call, just that note, still tucked in Daniel's journal like a pressed leaf. You dress quietly, layering shawls and pulling on borrowed boots. The house creaks around you, half asleep. Only the fire in the main room remains alive, throwing shadows across pine floors and cradle edges. The babies are bundled, warm and dreaming. You kiss each brow and whisper promises you never expected to say aloud. "I'll be back soon. I just need to see what came before me." The back porch groans beneath your weight. And there he is, Mason Blackwell, arms crossed, hat pulled low, backlit by the pre-dawn stars. He doesn't speak right away, just tips his head toward the trail. You follow. The world is blue and silver, frost-rimed and perfect. Your breath fogs between you. The snow crunches, not cruelly but rhythmically, like the land itself has begun to forgive. You don't speak for the first half mile. Then he says it. "I started carving that cradle the same winter I stopped talking to God." You stop. He doesn't. Rebecca was gone. The baby, too. House was full of silence. I couldn't sleep, couldn't read, couldn't stand the sound of my own breath. He glances at you, then away. So I cut wood. You walk again, slower. "And one day," he continues, "I found myself sketching something I hadn't built before, not for a client, not for sale, just because." "The cradle," you say. He nods. "Didn't know what it was for, not really. I just kept shaping it, sanding, reworking the joints. I'd finish, then take it apart and start again. And now," you say softly, "it holds my children." "Now," he echoes, "it's finished." You walk the rest of the way in silence. The path opens suddenly into a clearing you hadn't expected. Snow here is thinner, shallower. The ground beneath is warmer, and then you see it. A spring, not a spring of flowers, not yet, but a steaming pool cut into the snow, surrounded by moss that shouldn't be alive this time of year. A few red berries cling to a branch. The rocks are dusted in frost, and steam rises like breath. "It's beautiful," you whisper. He nods. "Found it the first year I came west. Didn't tell anyone. Built my life around this spring." "Why show me?" Mason removes his hat. His hair is damp at the temples, from sweat or snow or fear. You're not sure. "Because I think this story's no longer just mine." Your throat tightens. "I know what it's like," he adds, "to lose everything and still keep moving. To wake up every morning with a weight that doesn't shift. To dream about voices that aren't coming back." You blink hard, but the tears come anyway. "I thought I'd buried everything in that cradle," you admit. "My grief, my guilt, the pieces of Daniel that didn't fit inside a letter." "But then you arrived?" He takes a slow breath. "And suddenly everything unfinished in my life found a place." You look down at the water. There's still so much I don't know. About you, about this land, about what comes next. He kneels by the water, scoops a handful, lets it slip through his fingers. That's the thing about springs, he says. You don't have to know where the water comes from. Just trust it's enough to keep you going. You sit beside him, close enough that your knees touch. You've already done more than I can repay, you whisper. I'm not keeping score. He looks at you then, eyes steady. Elela nena, I didn't build that cradle for a stranger. I just didn't know whose story it belonged to yet. Your hand finds his, calloused, warm, human. I don't know what I'm ready for, you confess. That's all right, he says. You've got time now, and for once you believe that might be true. As the sun breaches the mountains, gold spills across the clearing, and the steam from the spring turns to light. You watch it together, not speaking, not rushing. The kind of silence that builds things, like trust, like home, like a future not yet named. You've seen him lift your babies like they're air. You've watched him wrap cold horses in warm blankets. You've heard the weight in his voice when he talks about land, storms, women he's lost. But today, for the first time, you see how he walks when he doesn't know you're watching. It's after breakfast. Mrs. Hathaway has taken the triplets to the back porch, wrapped in more quilts than you can count. Benjamin kicks, Charlotte hums. Abigail just watches, wide-eyed and alert. You step into the main room looking for Mason and spot him through the window. He's walking the fence line alone, not checking for breaks, not inspecting cattle, just pacing, long, slow steps, head down, hands in coat pockets. You don't want to interrupt, but you also don't want to pretend you didn't see. So when he returns, wind-chapped and quiet, you meet him in the hallway. Long morning? He nods. Brushes snow off his sleeves like shaking off ghosts. You tilt your head. You all right? Mason meets your eyes. Doesn't lie. Doesn't dodge. Just says, I saw something last night. You wait. Saddle left out in the barn. Looked like hers. You don't have to ask who her is. I know it wasn't real, just caught my eye in the dark. He shakes his head. Sometimes the past folds over itself. You understand, because last week you swore you smelled Daniel's tobacco, and the cradle creaked even though the babies were asleep. You don't have to pretend you're past it, you say. I'm not. Mason's mouth twitches. Didn't think you were. You both stand in the hush between storms, him on one side of memory, you on the other. Tell me about her, you say. He blinks then. Rebecca had a laugh that made you forgive her for all the trouble she caused. She liked maps, even though she got lost every time she left the house. Thought she could talk to deer, used to whistle in the woods, hoping they'd answer. You smile. Did they? Once. Scared her so bad she never did it again. You laugh gently. He smiles, not fully, but it's closer than you've seen in days. She would have liked you, he says, would have fussed over your hair. Told me to stop hovering. She sounds brave. She was. He pauses. So are you. The compliment lands like a stone in water, rippling long after it hits. Tell me about Daniel, Mason says. You weren't expecting that, but you nod. Daniel read medical journals at the breakfast table. Always had ink on his cuffs. He built a rocking chair for me when I was pregnant, even though he could barely hold a hammer straight. Said it was his way of helping me rest. And did it? You shake your head. It squeaked like a dying goose, but I used it anyway. Mason chuckles. The sound catches you both off guard. You look down, fingers curling into each other. I loved him, you say. but I never knew how much of me was tethered to him until he was gone. Mason nods. That's the cruel trick of grief. It doesn't just steal the person, it steals the version of you that lived beside them. The room is warmer now, not from fire, from truth. You step closer, just enough that your shadows blend. You're still figuring out who you are without her, you say, and you're doing the same. You nod. Neither of you speaks for a long time. You hear the babies cooing outside, the creak of the porch swing, Mrs. Hathaway singing some old folk lullaby. Then Mason breaks the silence. I want you to stay. Your breath catches, not just until the snow clears, not as a guest, as someone who belongs. He takes a step forward, not bold, careful, like he knows this part of you is fragile. I don't expect anything from you, Elelenena. Not today, not tomorrow. But this ranch, it could be a home, not a stopover, not a refuge. A start. You look up. His eyes don't waver. You once told me you didn't know why you kept carving that cradle, you say. He nods. Maybe I didn't come here to be rescued. Maybe I came to finish it. The words taste strange, like truth does when it surprises you. Then the door swings open, and a rush of cold air floods the room. Mrs. Hathaway steps in, cheeks flushed. Mail just arrived. Judge Wilson's coming through. He'll be here by sundown. You and Mason exchange a glance. That'll stir the pot, he mutters. But your voice is steady now, stronger than you expected. Let him. By the time Judge Wilson's wagon rolls up the snowy lane, you've buttoned your best dress and braided your hair tight enough to keep your composure in place. The babies are swaddled, lined up in the cradle like soft punctuation marks to your resolve. Mrs. Hathaway fusses over the hearth like she's hosting royalty, which, if you're honest, isn't far from the truth. Mason's quiet, too quiet. When he told you Judge Wilson was a friend, mentor even, you imagined something warm, gentle, someone with smile lines and a fondness for whiskey-soaked stories. But when the man steps through the front door, cold still clinging to his coat and sharpness clinging to his stare, you realize this isn't a reunion. This is an assessment. Mr. Blackwell, he says, nodding. Judge, Mason replies. Then the judge's eyes land on you. You rise, lift your chin, and meet his gaze head on. Mrs. Reed, is it? He asks. You nod. Yes, sir. He takes a moment. You can feel the weight of it, every imagined scandal, every whispered suspicion pinned between his brows. Then, with almost theatrical slowness, he walks toward the cradle. He doesn't touch the children, just looks. Benjamin stirs. Charlotte sucks her fist. Abigail opens her eyes and stares back. 3 infants, in winter, a wagon broken in a blizzard. His tone isn't cruel, just cold. I had no choice, you say quietly. There are always choices, he replies. Mason clears his throat. She was headed to Helena. Her cousin offered a place. And yet she's here. The room thickens. Mason steps closer to you almost without realizing it. A small thing, but the judge sees it. His eyes narrow. You don't flinch. Your husband? He asks. Dead, you say. 3 months now. He nods once. And what of your name, Mrs. Reed? What of reputation should you stay? You may be innocent, but a woman in your position, alone, dependent, under a man's roof. I'm not dependent, you say, voice sharper than you meant it. And I'm not alone. The words hang in the air like frost waiting to fall. Judge Wilson tilts his head just slightly. You can see he wasn't expecting fire, not from you. Mason clears his throat again, but softer this time. Judge, if you're here to inspect my moral standing, you're wasting your ride. If you're here for legal business, I suggest we start there." The judge raises his eyebrows. A hint of a smile flickers. "So there is still some heat in you, Blackwell. Good." He steps back from the cradle, turns to you both. "I came because there's talk. I wanted to see for myself whether it's smoke or something with flame." "And now that you've seen?" Mason asks. The judge surveys the room, at the hearth, the children, the cradle carved by a man who stopped speaking to God. "I see 3 infants alive when they shouldn't be. I see a woman who clearly hasn't collapsed under grief. And I see a man," he looks directly at Mason, "who might finally be stepping out of a grave he dug for himself 4 years ago." Silence again. Then, "May I stay the night?" You glance at Mason. He nods. "Of course." Mrs. Hathaway moves quickly to prepare the guest room. That evening, dinner is quiet. The judge asks nothing, observes everything. He watches Mason pull Charlotte into his arms, watches how you cut food with one hand while bouncing Benjamin with the other, watches how Abigail calms when you and Mason speak in the same breath. And when the fire dims, he says something you didn't expect. "You remind me of my daughter." You blink. She raised 4 on her own after her husband died at Antietam, moved west with nothing but a mule and a pocket Bible, built a schoolhouse in a mining town full of drunkards and doubt, and still, he says, people whispered. You look at him. What changed their minds? He smiles, thin and tired. She stopped caring what they thought. He stands. "I'll leave before first light. No need to see more. I've seen enough." Mason walks him to the door. You follow. The baby's asleep now. The house silent. Before stepping out, the judge turns to Mason. "She's not just a guest, and you know it." Mason doesn't answer. "Marry her," the judge says, "or send her on her way. But don't leave her half in, half out." You flinch, but Mason's jaw tightens. "I'm well aware," he says. The judge nods once, then he's gone. You stand in the entryway long after the cold air fades, your hands clutching the shawl tight against your chest. Mason is still. Then he says it, soft, almost like a confession. "He's right?" You don't speak, because your heart already knows. The snow hadn't stopped falling, but the house had begun to warm in other ways. You'd just finished changing Charlotte's cloth when Mrs. Hathaway called softly from the kitchen window. "Rider on the lane, sleigh, not mail." Mason stepped outside, already frowning. You moved to the window, peering through the frost-laced glass. The woman who descended from the sleigh didn't belong to this landscape. She wore a fur-trimmed coat in pristine cream, not the practical kind worn to survive storms, but the kind that made statements. Her boots were polished. Her gloves matched her hat. Her smile, visible even from here, was the sharpest thing about her. You felt your body react before your mind did, straightening, centering, guarding. Mason met her halfway down the walk, snow crunching beneath his boots. They exchanged words you couldn't hear, gestures too quick to read. Then he opened the door. And she stepped in like she owned the air. "Mason," she said, voice syruped with civility, "how long has it been?" 3 years, he replied. "You always did keep count." Her eyes swept the room, then found you. Paused, calculated. "And this must be—" You stepped forward, chin lifted. "Ellen in a reed." There was a beat of silence. Then a smile. "Of course." She extended a gloved hand. "Victoria Palmer. Friend of the family, of the Blackwells, I mean." You took her hand, cold, dry, light as paper. "A pleasure," you lied. She moved to the cradle like a cat to a warm seat. looked down at the sleeping triplets, and made a sound that might have been admiration or judgment. "Triplets," she said. "How efficient." You bit back your retort. Mason cleared his throat. "Victoria's managing her late husband's estate in Helena. She's here about timber contracts." "Among other things," Victoria added. She sat without invitation, crossed her legs, unbuttoned her gloves with the kind of care you reserved for removing splinters. "And you've been staying here how long, Mrs. Reed?" "A few weeks. Such a long stay for someone just passing through." "I nearly froze to death in a wagon during a blizzard," you replied. "Mason, Mr. Blackwell saved us." Her eyebrow lifted. "How gallant." The room tightened. Mrs. Hathaway entered, wiping her hands on a dishcloth. "Coffee, Victoria?" "Please," she said, voice lined with silk. "Something warm would be lovely." You felt the weight of your baby in your arms, and the weight of her gaze like frost on bare skin. Victoria didn't ask questions the way others did. She circled, implied, layered her curiosity under compliments so fragile they snapped under breath. "So you came west for family?" "Yes, you said." "And found something else, I suppose?" "I found safety." Her smile didn't shift, but her eyes sharpened. "How fortunate. Not everyone's so lucky out here. Some find only scandal." You didn't blink. "If surviving a storm and accepting kindness is scandalous," you said, "I hope to be scandalous again." Mason looked between you both, then stepped forward. "Victoria, you didn't ride all this way for coffee and commentary. What do you want?" She turned to him, lips parting as if hurt. "Mason, I only wanted to ensure things here were in order." "Things here are fine." She smiled again, this time wider. "And the Henderson property? Still considering it?" He folded his arms. "I'll make that decision in my own time." Victoria nodded, then rose, smoothing her coat. "Of course, I wouldn't dream of pressuring you. But with that grant opening up west of here, well, many eyes are turning in your direction, and I imagine you wouldn't want to tie your future to someone whose past isn't entirely untangled." The words landed between you like a dropped dish. Then she smiled sweetly at the babies and turned toward the guest room, leaving you in the echo of her perfume and the sharpness of her warning. Mason didn't speak right away. You didn't look at him, because you knew exactly what she meant. Someone whose past isn't untangled. Someone like you. Victoria's presence lingered longer than her perfume. She stayed the night. Of course she did, and the morning after, over an overly polite breakfast of biscuits and butter, she made her move. "Mason," she said, buttering a second slice with deliberate grace, "you should consider hiring a governess. If these little ones are to remain for any length of time, it would help appearances." The room stilled. You didn't speak, neither did Mason, so she went on. "I know someone in Helena, or perhaps—" She turned to you, eyes gleaming. "Mrs. Reed herself has experience?" Mason's voice cut through. "Elela Nana isn't here to be a governess." You looked at him, then at Victoria, then down at your hands, because what he said wasn't quite true either. You weren't anything officially, not wife, not kin, not hired help, just the woman sleeping in the spare room, raising 3 children in his house. You felt every unspoken word hanging in the slants. That afternoon Victoria left. She said her goodbyes with forced fondness and a final touch of Mason's arm that lasted 1 second too long. And when the sleigh wheels vanished down the snow-packed road, the house felt colder than the storm ever had. That evening, Mason knocked on your door. You were dressing Charlotte for bed, her little fingers batting the air. "I want to talk," he said. You nodded, placing Charlotte in the cradle beside her siblings. You pulled the door wider. He didn't sit. He paced. "I'm not good at saying things delicately," he started. "You don't have to," you said. He paused, then exhaled. The judge, Victoria, they both made points I can't ignore. You folded your hands in your lap. Points about appearances, about protection, he corrected. Not just yours, the children's, the ranch's. You nodded slowly. "So what do you propose?" He met your eyes. "I want to name you as the children's governess, on paper. That way no one can question your presence here. You'd have standing, a role." It was a kind offer, thoughtful, tactical. It also hit like a blow. "A role," you repeated. "One that justifies me." Mason's brows knit. "It's not meant that way." "I know," you said quietly, "but it feels that way." He stepped closer, his voice softer. "This isn't about you proving anything. It's about giving us breathing room, buying time." "Time for what?" "For things to become clear." You looked down at your hands again. "I've been a wife," you said, "then a widow, then a mother. Now you want me to be your employee?" He knelt before you, sudden and still. "No," he said, "I want you to stay." You looked up. "But I don't know how to ask that, not without giving the world something it can understand, so I'm asking this way." The candle beside you flickered. Charlotte shifted in her sleep. "Fine," you whispered, "but only on paper." He smiled, something tight in it, "Only on paper. And I won't wear a uniform." His smile cracked wider. "Wouldn't dare suggest it." You looked at him for a long time, then said, "You're really bad at halfway things, Mason Blackwell." He rose slowly. "That's the problem," he said. "So are you." That night you wrote to Harriet again. Told her you'd remain at Blackwell Ranch a while longer, until the roads cleared, until Mr. Patterson fully recovered, until spring found you. You didn't mention the arrangement, or how governess sounded like a lie you weren't ready to untangle. You just said, "We're safe." And that was true. For now. It started with a name, not yours, not Mason's, Daniel's, scrawled on a crumpled page from a leather folder you hadn't opened since the journey west began. You were sorting through the trunk, looking for baby cloths, not revelations, when you found it. A folded legal envelope, yellowed, edges soft. It read, "Reed Land Grant, Western Territory, 1839. You froze. Inside were copies, a letter from a territorial office, an old hand-drawn map, a claim made by Daniel's grandfather for land never properly surveyed, filed under an expedition payment grant during early Western expansion. You took it straight to Mason. He didn't blink, didn't scoff. He took the papers, spread them out over the dining table, and studied them like they were alive. "This matches what Victoria mentioned," he said. "She's been sniffing around the Henderson borderlands. That's here," he pointed. "And this Reed land presses against it." You stared at him. "That can't be coincidence." "No," he said flatly. "It's not." That same afternoon, Mason saddled Thunder and rode for town. You watched him go from the porch, wind snapping at his coat. The line of his back wasn't tense. It was decided. Mrs. Hathaway came beside you. "Where's he off to?" "Helena," you said. "To make inquiries." "About?" You held up the map. "Justice," you said. "And maybe something older than that." He returned 3 days later, mud-caked and hoarse, with papers in his coat pocket and fury in his eyes. "She's filing false claims," he said. "Harriet, your cousin. She's in Helena with a man named Lewis Clark, lawyer, shifty." You felt the heat crawl up your neck. "What kind of claims?" They're trying to prove Daniel willed the land to Harriet's husband. Fake signatures, backdated transfers. Your knees buckled. Mason caught your elbow. They're using the children's names, he said softly. Claiming they're guardians, you whispered. To take the land? To take everything. He didn't flinch. We'll stop it. That night, you sat by the fire with Daniel's journal in your lap. You flipped to the page he wrote after the babies were born. The last one. It said, "The world's big, but these little ones, bigger. Somehow. I hope they never need to fight for what's already theirs. But if they do, I hope someone helps them hold the line." You ran your finger along the words until they blurred. Then you whispered, "They will." Because Mason Blackwell wasn't just holding the line. He was preparing to defend it. In the days that followed, the mood inside the ranch shifted. No longer just refuge. Now it was headquarters. Mason contacted Judge Wilson, sent for a territorial lawyer of his own. Made space in the bunkhouse for witnesses, copies, protection. Meanwhile, you sat at the kitchen table, drawing up every memory you had of Daniel ever mentioning land, West, Montana, inheritance. You came up with almost nothing, but sometimes silence is the clue. Daniel hadn't cared about legacy. He'd only cared about care. He never filed those papers because land wasn't what he valued. But Harriet had, and now her hunger was threatening your children. You weren't afraid. You were ready. Mason handed you a quill the night the lawyer arrived. "You'll need to name them," he said. "The land?" "No," he said, smiling faintly. "Your children, on record, as heirs." You took the pen, wrote out each name in careful, deliberate script. Benjamin Daniel Reed, Charlotte May Reed, Abigail Hope Reed. The lawyer sealed the parchment, nodded once, and said, "It's done." You looked up at Mason. "You're not doing this just for justice, are you?" He shook his head. "I'm doing it for them." "And for me?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes." There was no proposal, no speech, no kiss, just truth. Warm and full, like firelight. The next morning Judge Wilson arrived. With him 2 marshals, 1 notary, and a saddlebag full of legal papers. "This will get messy," Chitty said. "You're prepared?" You nodded. "I've lived through storms worse than gossip." The judge smiled. "And for once, so did you." The map lay open across the long table in Mason's study, weighed down at each corner by tin mugs and a revolver. Sunlight from the east window hit the ink just right, casting long shadows over the words, "Reed Family Grant, 1839, 5,000 acres." Your hands hovered above the parchment like they were afraid to disturb history, or maybe truth. "I still don't understand," you said. "If Daniel never claimed it, how could Harriet file anything?" Mason leaned on the windowsill, arms crossed. His shirt was still dusted with snow from feeding the calves. She found out about the grant somehow, and when she learned Daniel died, she saw opportunity. "But there's no will, no deed, nothing ever passed to her." He nodded. "Exactly. Which is why her case is falling apart, now that Judge Wilson's seen the original papers. Your name, the children's." You looked over at the cradle in the corner, where all 3 were napping. Abigail stirred, but didn't wake. "Do they know?" you asked quietly. "Not yet," he said, "but they will." The lawyer, Mr. Adams, returned from town that afternoon, saddle-worn and red-faced from cold. "She's fled," he said without preamble. "Left Helena 2 nights ago, took her so-called advisor with her." "Clark?" Mason asked. The lawyer nodded. "He knew the fraud wouldn't hold once we filed the original grant. They're likely headed for Fort Benton or further west. maybe out of the territory entirely. You exhaled, long and slow. "They're gone," you whispered. "They're not a threat anymore," Judge Wilson added. "But we'll keep watch. If she ever returns, the law will be waiting." Later, when the marshals departed and the study quieted again, you stood beside Mason looking at the map one more time. "It's not just property," you said. "It's what he left them." "He didn't even know he was leaving it," Mason replied. "That doesn't matter," you said. "It's theirs now, and they'll grow up knowing it came from someone who never stopped trying to protect them." He looked at you then, eyes soft. "You're the one who protected them." "I did what I had to." "That's what I mean." He stepped forward close enough that you could feel the warmth radiating from his coat. He smelled like pine, smoke, and snow, like the whole mountain had stitched itself into the seams of his life. "This place," he said quietly, nodding toward the window, "it's yours too now." You swallowed. "It's still Daniel's." He didn't flinch. "It can be both." The truth of that made your chest ache, because maybe it could. You reached into your pocket, fingers closing around a scrap of paper. Daniel's last letter, a line from it, ran through your head like a thread stitching old grief to new ground. "Don't be afraid to grow somewhere I never saw." You opened the map again, touched the land's outline. "There's a spring here," you murmured. "Mason, is this near your sanctuary?" He leaned over your shoulder. "Close, just past the northern bend. I want to see it. With them." "We'll go tomorrow," he said, "soon as the sun rises." That night, when you returned to your room, the triplets stirred one by one. You fed them, rocked them. Then, as if summoned by memory, you sang, "Hush now, hush now." Winter's gone. Mason heard you from the hallway. You knew he had, but he didn't enter, not yet. You weren't done making peace with the man you'd loved first. When Abigail fell asleep, you whispered, "We're safe now, Daniel. You did it." You closed the letter, tucked it beside the map, and turned toward the door. You rise before dawn, already knowing he's waiting. The cradle holds 3 soft bundles, breathing slow and even. Abigail has kicked free of her wrap again, defiant even in sleep. You tuck the quilt back around her and kiss each forehead like a promise. Then you wrap your shawl, slip on the boots Mason insisted you keep, and step into the hallway. He's there. Of course he is. Leaning in the doorway like he's part of the frame. When he sees you, he straightens, but doesn't smile. This morning's too quiet for smiles. "You ready?" he asks. You nod. It's a short ride, but not a simple one. Snow still clings to the pines and the trail's packed hard by 100 hooves. You ride behind him, arms around his waist, the triplets left in Mrs. Hathaway's steady hands. The sky glows pale with the kind of light that doesn't warm, just reminds. When you reach the spring, it's just like you remembered, steam curling up from the earth like smoke from an invisible fire. The rocks glisten with dew. A deer track cuts through the soft crust of snow near the edge. Mason dismounts first, then helps you down. You stand in silence. The last time you were here, it felt sacred. This time, it feels final, not an ending, a threshold. He speaks first. "I haven't told you everything." You glance over. He's staring into the water. "My first year out here, after Rebecca passed, I wanted to disappear, not just from people, from myself." You wait. You've learned that's what he needs, space for honesty. "I used to come here and scream," he says. "Just scream into the steam. No one could hear, not even the wolves." You step closer, your boots brushing his. "Did it help?" No, not at first, but carving did. Fencing, building, doing things that left splinters. He finally turns to you. That cradle, it was the first thing I didn't burn. The words catch you off guard. You burned others? He nods. 3, 1 oak, 2 pine. Why? Because I couldn't finish them. You breathe in. The air smells like moss and thawing stone. I've burned things too, you say. Letters. Baby clothes I couldn't afford to carry. A copy of Daniel's death certificate. He nods. But you didn't burn his journal, Mason says. No. That one stayed warm. You're quiet again. Steam rises around you like the past itself trying to make peace. Then he reaches into his coat and pulls out something small, a box, carved, smooth, pale maple etched with tiny wildflowers. I meant to wait, he says, but waiting's never been good to either of us. He opens it. Inside a ring, simple, gold, shaped like a vine coiled around itself. You don't say anything, not because you're unsure, but because your throat has stopped working. I'm not asking for what you had with him, Mason says. I'm asking for something new, not to replace, but to grow beside it. Your eyes fill. I didn't think I could love again, you whisper. Me either. He closes the distance between you slow and certain. But then a woman with 3 babies walked into my storm, he says. And somehow, I found the part of myself I'd buried. You look up. I'm not healed, you warn. Not yet. Neither am I. I still cry for him. I might always. I'll hold you through it. You take the box from his hands. It's warm, as if it's already yours. I don't want to be just your governess, you say softly. You never were. You slide the ring onto your own finger. It fits like it's always been waiting. Then Mason touches your face. Not a kiss. Not yet. Just the press of his palm to your cheek. Solid, gentle, present. Your breath catches, and then finally, he kisses you. Not hurried, not desperate, but certain. When you part, you're both changed. He says it first. I love you. You say it second. I already knew. The first thing you notice when you return from the spring is how the house smells like cinnamon. The second thing you notice is Victoria Palmer's perfume. You step through the front door still holding Mason's hand. Steam, clinging to your shawl. The taste of his kiss still warm on your lips, only to find her standing in front of the fire like she never left. Mason, she says with a smile too bright, I do hope I'm not interrupting anything. You let go of his hand gently, not from shame, just from instinct, protection, posture. Mason doesn't answer right away. I thought you were back in Helena, he says. I was, she replies. But word travels fast when land gets claimed and names get whispered in courtrooms. She turns to you. And I had to see the woman who managed to go from frost-bitten fugitive to, what is it now, governess or something? Warmer? You inhale slowly, measured. I'm still the same woman, you say, just one who knows who she's protecting now. Victoria's gaze narrows slightly, but her smile doesn't fade. I came to discuss the Henderson property, she says, and to warn you, Mason, not everyone will see your arrangement here as noble. I'm not interested in appearances, he replies. Then you're a fool. No, you say before he can. He's a man who's seen enough loss to know what matters. Victoria's mask cracks just slightly. You think love and hardship make a claim stronger? She says, stepping closer. They make it messier and more vulnerable. She looks past you to the cradle. Benjamin is stirring now, rubbing his eyes. 3 children, no husband, 1 man, all under one roof. You move in front of her, instinctive. That's not mess, that's family. Her voice sharpens. It's not legal. Mason's voice cuts in behind you. It will be. The room stills. Victoria blinks. You're marrying her? He doesn't hesitate. Yes. You glance at him, not in surprise, but in confirmation. He meets your eyes, steady, true. I'll send word to Judge Wilson, he says. He'll officiate. And I'll make the adoption filings official once the paperwork is ready. Victoria stiffens. So that's it? You're throwing away everything we talked about, partnership, business, legacy? Mason steps forward, his jaw clenched. No, I'm protecting a legacy, one that actually matters. Then he says it with quiet force. Leave. Victoria lifts her chin, adjusts her gloves. You'll regret this, she says. The world doesn't bend for love. He nods. No, but it grows for it. She turns and walks out, the door clicking closed behind her like a final word. You exhale. Mrs. Hathaway appears from the hallway, holding Charlotte and raising one knowing eyebrow. Well, she says, was that the official proposal I just heard? You smile. I think it might have been. Mason shrugs. I'll do better, she smirks. I'm sure you will. That night the house is quiet. The snow outside is slow and soft. Charlotte falls asleep with her fist in your hair. Benjamin clutches Mason's finger like it's a lifeline. Abigail stares at the ceiling, wide-eyed and wondering. You tuck them in together, all 3. The cradle doesn't creak anymore, it sings. Later, you find Mason in the study. He's looking at the map again, the one with your name and Daniel's ink now side by side. He looks up as you enter, stands. You all right? He asks. You nod. I've never been more. You step into his arms, and this time you kiss him first. Not just because it's love, because it's choice, because it's time. The morning of your wedding arrives without warning. No parade, no satin, no aisle, just sun, glinting off thawing fences and a silence in the house that feels sacred. You dress slowly, not because the gown is elaborate. It's a simple blue wool, one you've worn before, but because something in you knows this will be the last time you wear it, as only Elelanina read. The next time it'll carry a different name, a new history, one stitched from survival and cradle wood and the scent of carved maple. Mrs. Hathaway has braided your hair, loosely, lovingly. It's how Rebecca wore hers on spring days, she says. You don't flinch, you nod. Because you're not replacing anyone, you're just continuing the story. Mason waits out back, near the spring. It was his request. I met you in the snow, he said. Let me marry you where the thaw began. The babies are bundled in a basket nearby, watched over by Mrs. Hathaway and Patterson, whose hands are still bandaged, but who insisted on dressing proper for the day, even if he couldn't button all the way to the collar. Judge Wilson stands between you and Mason, papers in hand, but his eyes aren't on the parchment. They're on you, you who once knelt by a fire with 3 half-breathing babies, you who rode into a storm and ended up here. He begins without flourish. You say your vows in quiet voices, meant not for an audience, but for each other. Mason goes first. I never thought I'd build a life again. I thought I'd use my hands only for fences and repairs. But then you came, 3 children in your arms, and grief on your breath, and suddenly everything I built made sense again. I vow to raise them with you, to walk beside you, not ahead, not behind, just with. Your throat tightens, but you speak anyway. I thought I had to carry everything alone. Daniel's memory, the weight of their future. But you taught me that love doesn't divide, it multiplies. I vow to bring that to this land, to this house, to us. Judge Wilson nods once. By the authority of this territory, and by the wind that brought you together, what's done is done. And what begins now, well, that's up to you. You kiss him, not because tradition demands it, but because your body does. It's soft, sure, unhurried, the kind of kiss you give when you know there's nothing left to survive but joy. The triplets squawk from the basket. The kiss breaks into laughter. Mason lifts Abigail, holds her above his head like she's made of gold. "Say hello to Mrs. Blackwell," he tells her. She sneezes. You both take that as a blessing. That afternoon you sit in the sun, feet tucked beneath you, Daniel's journal in your lap, the ring on your finger glinting like firelight. You open the journal to its final page and add one line beneath Daniel's final entry. We made it. The map lies nearby, still unclaimed by ink or iron posts, but you know exactly what it is now, not just property, legacy, inheritance, choice. Later, you stand on the porch as Mason holds Benjamin on his hip and Charlotte claps at birds. Abigail lies across your shoulder, humming the same sleepy sound you used to fear meant fever, but now know means contentment. I'm going to plant lilacs along the north fence, you say suddenly. Mason glances over. Why lilacs? Because they bloom in grief, you say. But they smell like forgiveness. He doesn't answer, just nods, because he understands. That night, long after the babies are down and the fire's low, you sit beside Mason, your head on his shoulder. We could have missed each other, you whisper. Easily, he says, 1/2 a mile off course, 1 hour too late. He doesn't finish. You don't need him to. But we didn't, you say. No, he agrees. We didn't. The wind stirs outside, softer now. The storm has passed, and inside the cradle, 3 children breathe in unison, as if their bodies already know what their hearts will one day understand, that the hardest paths sometimes lead exactly where you were meant to be. By the time the spring thaw truly comes, the valley has bloomed into something that feels like memory made real. Not the kind of memory that aches, the kind that softens, the kind that stays. You wake earlier now, not out of necessity, but because you want to see how the light pours through the lace of the curtain, how Charlotte rolls to her side, hand tucked beneath her cheek like she's always known comfort. Abigail still kicks free of her blanket before sunrise, and Benjamin has discovered that his cry can summon anyone, you, Mason, Mrs. Hathaway, even the ranch hands who pretend not to be wrapped around his tiny finger. Mason has converted the workshop into a full nursery. It wasn't your idea. But one morning you woke to the sound of hammering and found him building toy crates, shelves for picture books, and a small rocking horse with 3 carved initials beneath its saddle. B-E-D-R. C-M-H-R. You never asked what the letters meant to him. He never asked what they meant to you. That was the point. They meant them. One morning you ride out with him, just the 2 of you, to the edge of the property line. He rains thunder beside you and gestures toward a grove where apple trees are beginning to bud. We could build here, he says, a cabin for when they're older, a place to send them when they need air, space, sky. You smile. Or a place to hide when they're too loud. He chuckles. Either way. In the distance, the old trail glistens with meltwater. You follow its curve with your eyes. You no longer flinch when you think of the wagon, the blizzard, the broken wheel. You no longer hear Patterson's shouts in your sleep. You remember them, but they were no longer the loudest part of the story. One afternoon, as you rock Abigail near the hearth, she grabs a handful of your hair and mumbles something that almost sounds like a name. "Did you hear that?" you whisper. Mason looks up from the corner where he's sketching additions to the barn. "What?" "She said something, almost a word." He rises, takes her from your arms, cradles her against his shoulder. "What did you say, little one?" She opens her mouth again, gurgles, tries, and then, "Papa!" It's breathy, barely formed, but it lands like thunder. Mason stiffens. Breath catches. "Say it again," he murmurs. "Say it so I don't think I dreamed it." Abigail stares up at him, blinking with newborn calm, then giggles, chews on his collar, and repeats it, clearer this time. "Papa." You don't know whether to cry or laugh. So you do both. Mason's hands tremble. He looks at you like he doesn't know whether he has the right to believe what just happened. "She knows," you say softly. "Even if no paper says it yet, she knows." The next day he files the adoption papers. All 3 names, all 3 futures, all 3 sealed with a signature he practiced twice, as if afraid the ink might smudge. The day of the official hearing, Judge Wilson looks over the forms, then at Mason. "You sure?" he asks. "It's not just a title. It's a calling." Mason nods once. "I know." And when the final stamp lands, it's quiet. No fanfare. Just legal recognition of what love already made true. Later that evening, after supper, you take a walk around the house. The sky is blushing pink. The last of the snow is melting under the fence posts. The horses graze quietly, as if they too have found peace. You sit on the porch swing watching the sun set. Mason joins you, a blanket tossed over both your laps. "They're asleep?" you ask. He nods. "All 3, even Charlotte, finally." You lean against him. "We survived the winter." "We did," he says. "And now spring." He squeezes your hand. "And everything after." The swing creaks gently beneath you, the kind of sound you used to associate with loneliness, with rocking chairs and empty rooms. Now it just sounds like rhythm, like life. "Do you think he'd be proud?" you ask suddenly. Mason turns. "Daniel." You nod. "I do," he says without hesitation, "because you haven't let go of him. You just let more in." You smile. And for once, that smile feels entirely yours, not borrowed, not stitched from necessity, just true. The cradle stands quiet now, not because it's empty, because it's no longer a lifeboat. It's become a place of rest, a symbol not of desperation, but of continuation. A chapter closed and another one begun, with laughter, lullabies, and tiny hands learning to hold the world.